Hello everyone. Today, I want to talk about something we're taught to avoid but maybe for the wrong reasons. Weakness. Now, when I say that word weakness, what comes up for you? Maybe failure. Maybe fear. Maybe not being good enough. I want to invite us to take a pause and challenge that definition. Because avoiding weakness doesn't mean pretending to be perfect. It doesn't mean stuffing down our feelings or powering through no matter what. Avoiding weakness, true weakness, means refusing to disconnect from our growth, our courage, and each other. Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, I was working with a group of college students. Bright, driven, full of energy. But beneath that energy, there was an undercurrent of something else: burnout, anxiety, imposter syndrome. One student, I'll call him David, came to me and said, "I just can't let people see that I'm struggling. That's weakness." And I said, what if struggling isn't weakness? What if pretending you're not is? Here's what the research tells us, and yes, I'm a researcher, so I've got to bring that in. True weakness is not about failing. It's about choosing comfort over courage. It's about the fear that keeps us small. When we avoid hard conversations, when we don't ask for help, when we numb our emotions, that's weakness. Because it keeps us from learning, from growing, from connecting. But when we are willing to say, "I don't know," or "I need support," or "I messed up and I want to do better," that's not weakness. That's strength wearing a softer jacket. In the classroom, in our communities, in our families, we need to teach this. We need to model this. Because if we want to raise a generation that's brave, not broken, we have to show them that strength isn't about the armor. It's about the honesty. Let me leave you with this. Avoiding weakness isn't about avoiding emotion. It's about avoiding the habits that rob us of our power, like perfectionism, shame, and fear of failure. If we want to be strong, we have to get curious. We have to ask better questions. We have to look inside, even when it's uncomfortable. Because courage isn't the absence of weakness. It's choosing to show up, especially when we feel weak, and still daring to be seen. When we hear the word weakness, we often attach it to something deeply negative, even shameful. It's a word that carries weight emotionally, socially, and psychologically. For many of us, it's been conditioned into our mindset from a very young age. Weakness, we're told, is something to avoid at all costs. It's the thing that gets in the way of success, the thing that makes us look vulnerable, the thing that opens us up to judgment, criticism, or failure. But what if we've been misunderstanding what weakness actually is? As a researcher and someone who has spent years studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and connection, I can tell you that weakness isn't what most people think it is. In fact, much of what we label as weakness, emotion, empathy, asking for help, being open about our struggles, is not weakness at all. These are acts of bravery. These are signs of strength, not signs of failure. Let me take you back to a moment that changed the way I thought about this entirely. I was speaking to a group of educators, and during the Q&A, one teacher stood up and said, "I love your work, but I still can't shake the feeling that if I admit I'm overwhelmed in front of my students, they'll lose respect for me. Isn't that a kind of weakness?" And I paused for a second, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew this belief was so deeply rooted in our culture that untangling it would take more than a simple answer. I looked at her and said, what if admitting you're overwhelmed is actually the most courageous thing you could do in that moment? What if weakness isn't about admitting where we are, but pretending we're somewhere else? This moment led to a deeper conversation about what we define as weakness. So often, we confuse emotional honesty with fragility. We think that showing up with our whole selves, especially when we're struggling, somehow makes us less credible, less powerful, or less worthy. But the truth is, hiding our emotions, disconnecting from others, pretending everything is fine when it's not, that's where the real weakness lies. Avoiding our own vulnerability, denying our needs, and putting on a mask every day may feel like strength, but it often comes from fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of not measuring up. And when we act from that place, we aren't growing. We're surviving. We're getting through. But we're not expanding, connecting, or evolving. Real strength comes from self-awareness. It comes from the willingness to look at ourselves honestly, to own our imperfections, and to work through them without shame. Strength means saying, "I don't know, but I'm willing to learn." Strength is saying, this is hard, and I'm still going to show up. And most importantly, strength is saying, I can't do this alone, because that kind of openness builds community and resilience. Think about the people in your life you respect the most, not for what they've achieved, but for who they are. Chances are, these are people who have let you see them as they truly are. People who haven't needed to be perfect to be powerful. People who have embraced their humanity, and in doing so, helped you embrace yours. That is not weakness. That is leadership. In our classrooms, in our families, in our organizations, we need to redefine what it means to be weak. We need to stop equating struggle with failure and start seeing it as part of the process. If we continue to shame people for being honest about their challenges, we are not cultivating strength, we are cultivating silence. And silence does not build strong people. It builds masks. It builds resentment. It builds walls. One of the most powerful things we can do is to model vulnerability in a way that's grounded, responsible, and real. When we share our challenges not as a way to offload pain onto others, but as a way to create space for growth, we give people permission to do the same. We create a culture of learning instead of a culture of performance. We encourage people to engage with life, rather than pretend they've already figured it all out. Now, I'm not suggesting we walk around constantly exposing our inner world to everyone we meet. There is a difference between vulnerability and oversharing. But redefining weakness means knowing that strength is not in how well we hide, but in how honestly we engage with our world. This is especially true in educational spaces. Students aren't just learning academic content, they're learning how to be people. If we teach them, directly or indirectly, that strength is about pushing through without emotion, never asking for help, or always knowing the answer, we are setting them up for burnout and disconnection. But if we model curiosity, humility, and authenticity, they will learn that growth is not linear and that courage looks different on different days. Avoiding weakness isn't about avoiding emotion. It's about rejecting the idea that showing emotion is a flaw. It's about refusing to let fear of judgment keep us from being whole. And it's about calling out the cultural messages that have told us for too long that we have to be bulletproof to be worthy. So, when we say we want to avoid weakness, let's be clear about what we mean. Let's avoid the kind of weakness that comes from denial, shame, and isolation. Let's avoid the weakness that keeps us from evolving. And instead, let's walk toward the kind of strength that's born from openness, from self-awareness, and from connection. Because that truly is where our power lies. There's a phrase I come back to again and again in my work, and it's this: choose courage over comfort. It sounds simple, almost like a motivational poster you'd see hanging in a school hallway or a gym. But when you really sit with it, when you take a breath and ask yourself what that actually looks like in the messy, unpredictable moments of real life, you start to realize just how difficult and powerful it is. We live in a world that is constantly selling us comfort. Easy fixes. Quick results. Emotional shortcuts. Everything is designed to be convenient, seamless, polished. We've built a culture around the idea that if something is uncomfortable, it's probably not worth doing. But here's the truth that most of us already know, deep down: nothing meaningful ever comes without discomfort. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. It happens at the edge of uncertainty. It happens when we make the conscious choice to show up fully, even when it's awkward, even when it's scary, even when there are no guarantees. I remember working with a group of high school educators, and one teacher shared a story about a student who was consistently disruptive in class. She told me, "It's easier for me to just send him out, write him up, and move on. But something in my gut tells me that's not the right thing." I asked her, what would the courageous choice look like? She paused and said, "To keep him in. To ask him what's really going on. To risk the rest of the class seeing me as soft or losing control. But also, maybe, just maybe, to build a real connection." That moment stuck with me. Because that's exactly what courage over comfort looks like. It's that pause where you know what's easier, but you choose what's braver. In our schools, in our homes, in our workplaces, there are 1,000 micro moments every day where we're offered that same choice. And sometimes, let's be honest, we don't choose courage. Sometimes, comfort wins. We avoid the hard conversation. We laugh off the offensive joke instead of saying it crossed a line. We stay silent when we know we should speak up. Not because we are bad or weak, but because we are human. And comfort feels safe. Comfort feels predictable. But the cost of constantly choosing comfort is high. When we protect ourselves from discomfort, we also protect ourselves from growth. We miss out on connection. We keep ourselves small. And perhaps most heartbreakingly, we teach the people around us, especially our students, our children, our colleagues, that vulnerability is something to be avoided, rather than embraced. Courage is not about fearlessness. Courage is about feeling the fear, acknowledging the risk, and showing up anyway. In my research, I've seen this time and time again: the people who are most resilient, the people who lead with integrity and inspire others, aren't the ones who never feel afraid. They're the ones who are willing to lean into fear, because they know that what's on the other side matters more. And let's be real, choosing courage over comfort isn't glamorous. It doesn't usually come with applause. Sometimes, it looks like being the only person in the room willing to raise their hand and say, "I don't understand this." Sometimes, it looks like setting a boundary and sitting in the discomfort of someone else's disappointment. Sometimes, it's admitting you were wrong, not because it feels good, but because it's the right thing to do. There's a misconception that courage is loud and bold and big. But more often, it's quiet. It's subtle. It's the conversation you have with yourself before walking into a difficult meeting. It's the voice inside you that says, "You don't have to know everything, you just have to be present." And it's the decision to keep showing up, not just when you're confident, but especially when you're not. Think about how this plays out in education. Students don't need perfect teachers, they need authentic ones. When educators choose courage over comfort, they model something invaluable: the willingness to be real. When a teacher admits they don't have all the answers, they give students permission to do the same. When they hold space for difficult emotions instead of brushing them aside, they teach that learning is emotional, not just intellectual. That kind of teaching, grounded in bravery and humility, changes lives. And this goes beyond the classroom. Parents, leaders, friends, we are all given chances every day to choose courage over comfort. And when we do, we create space for deeper trust and genuine relationships. We break the patterns that keep us stuck. We step into the kind of person we want to be, not just the kind that fits in. I want to be clear, this isn't about choosing suffering or discomfort for its own sake. It's not about pushing yourself to exhaustion or staying in painful situations just to prove you're brave. It's about discerning the difference between comfort that protects and comfort that prevents. The kind that allows us to rest and the kind that keeps us from showing up. Because here's the paradox: the more we choose courage, the more resilient we become. Discomfort doesn't scare us in the same way. We build tolerance for uncertainty. We learn to trust ourselves. And we begin to see that our capacity is much greater than we thought. Courage isn't a trait some people are born with, it's a skill we practice. And like any skill, it gets stronger the more we use it. It's in the small decisions. The pauses before we respond. The questions we dare to ask. And over time, those choices stack up. They shape who we are. So, in those moments where you feel the pull toward comfort, the urge to shrink, to avoid, to smooth things over, just take a breath and ask yourself, what does courage look like right now? Not what's easy. Not what's familiar. But what's brave. Because when we start choosing courage over comfort, moment by moment, we don't just change ourselves, we start to change the culture around us. And that's how transformation begins. When we talk about connection, most people think of something soft. Something nice to have. A luxury, not a necessity. But the truth is, connection is not just a warm, fuzzy feeling we get from being around people we like. It is a basic human need. It is wired into our biology. From the moment we are born, we are designed to connect, to belong, to feel seen and heard. And when that need goes unmet, the consequences are not just emotional, they are physical, cognitive, and even spiritual. I've spent years researching vulnerability, shame, and resilience, and there is one thing that keeps rising to the surface: when we feel disconnected, whether it's from other people, from ourselves, or from purpose, something in us begins to break down. Disconnection breeds shame, fear, isolation, and a sense of being not enough. And those feelings become fertile ground for what we might call weakness, not in the way society often defines it, like crying or admitting you're struggling, but in the true, more dangerous sense, the kind of weakness that comes from losing our sense of belonging and value. What I've found in my work is that connection is the antidote to all of that. It is the antidote to shame. It is the antidote to fear. It is the antidote to the loneliness that convinces us we are alone in our struggle. It is not a quick fix or a band-aid. It is a deep, intentional, and ongoing practice of choosing to show up for each other and for ourselves in ways that are real. I remember a story from a woman I interviewed during my research on wholehearted living. She was a mother, a community volunteer, and by all outward measures, deeply successful. But she told me that every day, she felt like she was falling apart inside. When I asked her what helped her shift out of that space, she didn't say therapy, medication, or yoga, though those are all valid and powerful tools. What she said was this: a friend came over one night, and instead of telling me to pull it together, she sat on the kitchen floor with me while I cried. She didn't say anything wise. She didn't try to fix me. She just stayed. That moment gave me enough strength to try again the next day. That is connection. That is the medicine. And yet, we live in a time where connection is increasingly rare. We have more ways to communicate than ever before, and yet we are seeing unprecedented levels of loneliness, especially among young people. We scroll instead of speak. We post instead of connect. And somewhere along the way, we started believing that being independent meant being disconnected. That asking for help was a burden. That needing others was weak. But the data tells a very different story. Strong relationships, real ones, not just social media connections, are one of the biggest predictors of resilience, mental health, and overall well-being. Connection helps regulate our emotions. It helps us learn better, lead better, parent better, live better. And most importantly, it reminds us that we are not alone. One of the most dangerous things I've seen, especially in schools and leadership spaces, is the myth that vulnerability pushes people away. That if you let people see your real self, your fears, your failures, your flaws, they will reject you. And so we armor up. We pretend. We perform. And ironically, it's that performance that disconnects us. True connection can only happen when we are brave enough to be seen. And that doesn't mean telling everyone everything all the time. It means choosing to be honest in moments when honesty could create trust. It means reaching out when we'd rather withdraw. It means saying, "I'm not okay," instead of "I'm fine," when fine is a lie. I think about educators who are holding so much curriculum, emotional labor, pressure to perform, and yet are expected to be pillars of strength at all times. But here's what we know: students don't need perfect teachers. They need human ones. Teachers who can model emotional literacy, who can say, "This is a tough day, but I'm here with you." That kind of presence is not only powerful, it's transformational. The same is true for parents, leaders, peers, and friends. When we allow others to see us as we really are, not as invulnerable, but as imperfect, evolving people, we give them permission to do the same. That shared humanity is where connection begins. Connection also calls for empathy. And I want to be clear, empathy is not about fixing people. It's about being with people. Empathy says, "I might not know exactly what you're going through, but I'm willing to sit with you in it." That kind of presence creates safety, and safety is what allows people to grow. In many ways, connection is about choice. The choice to stay present. The choice to listen. The choice to reach out, even when it feels risky. And the choice to believe that being human, messy, vulnerable, imperfect is enough. If we want to avoid true weakness, we have to build systems and relationships that are grounded in connection. We have to stop shaming people into silence. We have to stop pretending that strength means never needing anyone. And we have to start teaching that community is not a backup plan, it's the foundation. When we feel connected, we are braver. We are more open to learning, to failing, to trying again. Connection doesn't erase difficulty, but it gives us the strength to face it. It softens the edges of pain and magnifies the joy of triumph. So the next time you're tempted to go it alone, to put on the mask, to power through without reaching out, pause. Ask yourself, what would happen if you let someone in? What would happen if you showed up, not as the polished version of yourself, but as the real one? Because when we do that, when we risk connection, we don't just heal ourselves. We heal each other. Self-awareness is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. We hear it in leadership trainings, therapy sessions, personal development books. It sounds impressive, but too often, it's misunderstood. Self-awareness is not just about knowing your favorite color or which personality test result you got. It's not just introspection or thinking deeply about your feelings. It's the conscious knowledge of who you are, your emotions, your triggers, your patterns, your values, your beliefs, and how those parts of you affect the people around you. It's understanding how your inner world influences your outer actions, and it's the foundation of growth, connection, and emotional resilience. The reason self-awareness is so powerful is because it pulls us out of autopilot. So many of us go through our days reacting to situations based on scripts we've been handed, scripts built from childhood experiences, cultural messages, unspoken expectations. We tell ourselves, "This is just how I am," or "This is just how life works," without ever pausing to question where those beliefs came from or whether they're still serving us. But self-awareness interrupts that automatic loop. It creates a space between stimulus and response, and in that space, we get to choose. We get to decide if we want to keep reacting the same way or if it's time to write a new script. I remember interviewing a corporate leader who said, "I didn't realize how much fear was running my decisions until I started paying attention to the stories I told myself." That stuck with me. Because when we're not self-aware, we're not leading from clarity, we're leading from fear, from shame, from insecurity. We may not even know it, but our unresolved emotions leak out. They show up in how we speak to others, how we avoid certain tasks, how we overwork or undercommunicate. And the people around us feel it, even if they can't name it. In education, in parenting, in leadership, in friendship, self-awareness is not optional. It's essential. A teacher who isn't aware of their own biases can unintentionally reinforce harmful dynamics in the classroom. A parent who isn't aware of their own childhood wounds may project them onto their children. A leader who isn't aware of how they handle stress can create a toxic culture without realizing it. But when we cultivate self-awareness, we create the possibility for transformation, not just for ourselves, but for everyone we influence. And self-awareness is not a destination. It's a practice. It means consistently asking yourself hard questions: what am I feeling right now, and why? What part of me feels threatened in this moment? What story am I telling myself, and is it true? Where am I operating from fear instead of values? These questions are uncomfortable. They pull up things we might prefer to ignore. But this is where real strength comes from, not from pretending we've got it all figured out, but from daring to look inward and get honest with what we find. One of the hardest truths I've had to learn in my own life is this: you cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. And often, the reason we avoid self-awareness is because we're afraid of what we'll see. We're afraid we'll find something unworthy or broken. But the reality is, you don't build shame by facing yourself, you build shame by hiding from yourself. When you look inward with compassion instead of judgment, you give yourself permission to grow without tearing yourself down. And let's be real, self-awareness doesn't mean perfection. It means accountability. It means recognizing when you've been reactive instead of responsive. It means noticing when you're operating from ego instead of empathy. It means being able to say, "I got it wrong," without collapsing into shame or defensiveness. That's emotional maturity. That's what builds trust. That's what creates safe spaces for others to be authentic too. In my research, I've found that people who have high levels of self-awareness are more connected, more resilient, and more grounded in their values. They are less likely to get hijacked by emotion and more likely to take aligned action. They know the difference between reacting from an old wound and responding from a place of wholeness. And that difference changes everything from how we handle conflict to how we pursue purpose. And let's not forget the role of self-awareness in empathy. You can't truly understand someone else if you haven't first tried to understand yourself. When we're disconnected from our own emotional landscape, we tend to judge others more harshly. We take things personally. We project our pain onto others. But when we can sit with our own emotions, when we can name them and work through them, we build the capacity to sit with others in theirs. That's the foundation of compassion. There's something deeply empowering about being able to say, "This is mine. This reaction, this fear, this need for control, it's mine. It might not be serving me, but now that I can see it, I can work with it. I can choose differently." That's what self-awareness gives us, the power of choice. The ability to respond instead of react. The freedom to lead from our values rather than our pain. And yes, the path to self-awareness is messy. Sometimes it's painful. It asks you to get real about your patterns, your coping mechanisms, your blind spots. But it's also deeply liberating. Because once you see yourself clearly, you're no longer at the mercy of unconscious behaviors. You become the author of your own story, not just a character following someone else's script. In a world that often encourages us to look outward toward achievement, performance, comparison, self-awareness calls us back to ourselves. It's a quiet, powerful rebellion. It says, I refuse to live on autopilot. I will know myself. I will own my choices. I will lead with integrity. So, if we want to avoid true weakness, the kind that comes from disconnection, fear, and self-abandonment, then we have to cultivate the courage to be self-aware. To turn inward, not with criticism, but with curiosity. To ask the questions that matter, even when the answers are hard. And to keep showing up, again and again, with honesty, humility, and heart. Because when we know ourselves, we can show up for others. And when we show up for others, we begin to create a world rooted not in fear, but in authenticity, connection, and courage. That is the power of self-awareness. To all my amazing friends and supporters. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching my videos, liking, sharing, and being a part of this journey. Your encouragement means the world to me. I couldn't have come this far without your unwavering support. Let's continue to grow and learn together. Much love and gratitude to each one of you.